Welcome to Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes. I am your resident fairy godmother, Tamara Angela. And today we are continuing with talking about some of the planets that we don't typically discuss. A lot of times we're discussing Mercury and that one, Mercury and Mercury retrograde, gets discussed all the time. But there are other planets that are super significant to our transformation and just how we see ourselves. So this episode is it's about Saturn, and I'm also going to include Neptune. I was going to do them both separate, but I'm going to put them in this episode together because I've already done a post about the Neptune generations and things of that nature. And if you have been following me, you've seen the post about the Neptune generations. I'll kind of talk about that a little bit during this episode too, because it makes sense to mention it, but it is a past episode as well. But we're going to talk about Saturn in 2022 as well as 2022, Saturn in 2024, and Neptune in 2024. So take notes. Make sure you go back, listen to this episode again as many times as you need to, because I'm going to give you guys a lot of information that is going to be super helpful for you. So, starting out with Saturn. So Saturn is Saturn governs our maturity, our growth, the rules we set for ourselves, the boundaries that we have for ourselves. Saturn talks about our actual reality, which is why I kind of wanted to group this with Neptune, because Neptune talks about our illusions, right? So Saturn is kind of a bit more concrete. Saturn rules Capricorn. Saturn rules that earth energy of Capricorn, that organized, that plan of action, that kind of thing. So Saturn spends about 2 to 2.5 years in each sign, depending on when it goes retrograde and things like that. But one thing you'll hear in the astrology community is talking about your Saturn return. So your Saturn return is about every 28 to 29 years. So I love this concept because for me, I feel like we live several lifetimes in one lifetime, right? So there's always time to kind of reinvent yourself and rebrand yourself, if you will. And we do that after we kind of grow and develop and expand and figure out these different things about ourselves. And we do that like every 20 years or so, right? So basically, Saturn returns back to, your Saturn return is when your Saturn returns back to the place it was at the time of your birth. So you have your first Saturn return like right as you're getting to 30, right? And then you think about that, you have your second one right as you're getting to about 60. Look at how different a person you are between those ages, right? So many different things have changed. And the way that we live life now, some people are just starting another lifetime at 60. They're going back to college. They're doing new careers. The kids are out of the house. They may be a grandparent. They're traveling. They're doing more things with a sense of freedom They're knocking things off their bucket list. So that Saturn return is really important because it shows us physically how we've grown, mentally how we've grown. And it talks about the personal code that we have for our life, because all of us should have a personal code that we guide ourselves by. So with that in mind, Saturn is in Pisces all year long in 2024, because basically Saturn moved into Pisces in March of 2023. And it's going to stay in Pisces until May of 2025. And then September 2025 to February 2026, it will be in Pisces again, because there's this retrograde activity that's going back and forth, where it's moving back and forth between two different signs. And so what do we expect with Saturn and Pisces? So Pisces is ruled by Neptune. Another reason why I wanted to kind of group these together in this episode, because Neptune is also in Pisces. So Saturn in Pisces, what do we get? Well, we're talking about what is reality and being honest with ourselves about what's working in our relationships. This is a sense of needing to understand empathy, understand and demonstrate empathy, having deeper spiritual connections, which we've been talking about across the board for a couple years now on the podcast, talking about having those deeper spiritual connections. Saturn in Pisces is going to help us like hash some things out where our mental health is concerned, just overall awareness for, like overall well-being, talking about practices and lifestyle. And in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces is kind of like a rebuild, right? But it asks you, are we doing any of these things that we're like rebuilding? Are we doing it for something that's better, right? And so there's this space where we may have realized that for a long period of time, we've been doing XYZ where health and wellness is concerned. And maybe that worked for the era that we were in, but now things are different. So we've adapted as human beings. And so now we have to do things a bit differently, right? That always tends to come up. Mental health. I mean, there are new diagnoses being placed in the DSM. People having a better understanding of mental health as a whole, and understanding that it like breaking down the stigma that's related to going to see a therapist. Like, it's much more on trend now. It's much more acceptable now to go see a therapist out in the open, that kind of thing. So those kind of things have kind of started to evolve, and they're being supported by Saturn and Pisces. Looking at lifestyle practices, people don't want to go back to the office because they realize that, lifestyle wise, there's less stress. There are less cars on the road because people aren't having to drive to work. Your gas, you're not spending as much on gas because you don't have to do that. You're not spending as much on daycare because you can be home when your kids come home from school now. Like, there are all these things with our lifestyle that have changed and given us a sense of reality, which is like, you can still be productive working from home. Where it was like, oh no, you have to come in the office and be micromanaged. No, the reality is a lot of people are getting a lot of things done working from home, and businesses have lower overhead and they can still produce, right? And so Saturn in Pisces has kind of fleshed all of that stuff out. But it's also giving us a clear look at the fact that people aren't as empathetic to others. Like, we highly lack empathy as a whole. Cancel culture shows us that the fact that people wake up every day and want to argue and bicker about things, about every single topic with no form of intellect. There's no emotional intelligence involved in a lot of our conversation. And people lack empathy until they need empathy. So that gives us a breakdown in our spiritual connections as well, because our overall wellness is breaking down. People are taking care of the outside, but maybe not the inside as much as they need to do. And so Saturn in Pisces comes through and just is asking us to change, like what needs to change about these personal goals, what needs to change about our personal code, because we have to have something that governs us internally, right? We have to have things that govern us internally, so then that way we show up in the world as who we're supposed to be as a whole human being, and then in turn that adds to the collective. Now, Saturn goes retrograde in Pisces on June 29th. And so anytime we have something going retrograde, it's a time of reflection. It's a time to pause. It's a time to make sure you kind of have all your ducks in a row and you're acting in a way that is in alignment with who you're designed to be and what you're asked to do. So Saturn is going retrograde during a month where we have the summer solstice. We have full moon in Capricorn that month, new moon in Gemini. We also have just is sun moving into Cancer. That's Cancer season along with the solstice. So we're looking at like, how do we connect with the life around us, right? And so we're already looking at that for June. And then on the 29th, Saturn goes retrograde in Pisces. So we're focusing on setting boundaries that we follow ourselves, because a lot of times people are like setting boundaries and rules for other people, but it's like, you have to practice what you preach. Like it's not okay for you to say, oh, okay, you have to do this. I want my friends to do this, but then it's like, well, what do you do? Like, why are you not practicing what you preach where all of that is concerned? So we have to be a little bit more concerned with sweeping around our own front door, and practicing what we preach where things are concerned. Because the reality is you can't be out there being hypocritical when your stuff isn't in order. It makes no sense, right? And this comes to terms with a lot of folks where I've seen this conversation before where they were just like, could you follow a financial specialist who didn't have their money in order? And I'm like, that's so incongruent, right? I can follow you if you're a financial specialist and you're not a millionaire, because maybe my goal isn't to be a millionaire. Maybe my goal is to be able to put all my ducks in a row where my finances are concerned. I can follow a financial specialist who has been through the ringer where their finances are concerned and they addressed it and fixed it with the same things that they're telling me to do. That makes sense. I've had people ask me like, oh my gosh, you really go for your own readings? You really practice Reiki? Well, yeah, all the stuff that I give you guys is based on stuff, partially based on stuff that I do for myself, right? And I say this all the time, like I don't want to go to a tattoo artist who doesn't have tattoos. Something is incongruent about that. And what can really happen is you can have people who are not in a space of service or delivering a service with a sense of real love and gratitude because they see themselves higher than you. They see themselves as far removed. One of the first things we learned going to graduate school for being a clinical therapist is that you need to go to therapy yourself. Like you can't sit on one side of the chair as the therapist and you've never been to therapy. As a matter of fact, they made sure all of us had like a therapy session or two for those who hadn't already, but then they also had us, sit and have a therapy session. You need to have empathy for the person who is in the chair in front of you, who is paying to access your service. You need to have some type of understanding of what they're going through so you understand the balance of the relationship. And so Saturn in Pisces retrograde talks about having that balance so there's no hypocrisy, right? Also, coming up with that Saturn in Pisces retrograde, the ancient soul needs seclusion to regenerate. Our souls are constantly going through karmic battles and trying to organize our steps along the way in this thing called life. And so the soul needs some type of seclusion in order to regenerate. You need to step away, have a little disconnection from conversations and all this outside clutter in order for you to regenerate. So think about it. It's like your phone it needs to be plugged in and charged. But the thing that really, really gets your phone working in optimal condition is to shut it off for a second and then shut it back on and then turn it back on. So then that way, everything that happened during the charge or the update, it all comes together and reboots. In that reboot, it comes together so all the systems are running at the same speed. And that's what we need to do more of for ourselves to regenerate. It'll be easier to solve your own problems when you focus on yourself as well, which is interesting because we got that solstice energy in June, which talks about connecting with the life around us, but you best do that when you've taken care of yourself. So old analogy, with therapy, there's that analogy about, who gets the air supply on the plane if it's you and a child next to you. Well, or somebody that's elderly. You do. Because you can't help them if you're passed out. Somebody's got to get it together to help the other person. And so you're better functional when you're away, when you have your own awareness, and when you are able to feel more full. It's easier for you to give. It's a better time for you to give when you kind of have all of that together. So Saturn and Pisces, pulling all of those pieces together. Saturn goes direct in Pisces November 15th. So basically, what is that? That's about like 5 months of us taking inventory in that space and really asking ourselves, like, let me delve into my personal code. What's really good for me? What have I learned all this time? So November's energy in general has a lot of forward motion and these warrior spirits that are emerging, but they're not necessarily moving in the right direction. We're going to have like a lot of misguided energy in November. And so Saturn goes direct on the 15th. And it gives us a space where our illusions are way more clear. But you got to understand that martyrdom that is being experienced is quite scary. So, and it's really detrimental. So we have to look at making sure that we're not living spaces in avoidance versus walking down a clear path. So one of the things I talk about sometimes with some of my clients is the fact that avoidance doesn't mean that you have healed. It simply means that you're learning how to function in the absence of the thing that is the stressor, right? The kind of the true litmus test of healing is, what do you do when that stressor presents itself? What do you do when that temptation presents itself? Listen, I love blocking folks. Blocking people is helpful. It's healthy in a lot of cases, but and for some folks it's good. It's like I've had to block people so then that way it helps them to not bother me. As once they see you, they're like, ah, and they just kind of come for you. But then sometimes it's like, I may need to block a stimulus or avoid a stimulus because I don't need to constantly be dealing with the temptation, right? So I don't need to go buy that snack cracker. I don't need to go buy that coffee. I don't need to go to the Kroger that has the Starbucks. Let me go to the Kroger that doesn't have the Starbucks, so I'm not tempted by the coffee. But eventually I have to do the work to not crave the coffee, or to be able to deal with what life feels like when I crave the coffee. Because the reality is, I'm going to go somewhere. Maybe I'm going to go to my aunt's house and she's brewed some coffee. Or maybe I show up with my homegirl and she's got an iced latte in the front seat. What do I do? What person do I become when I see that latte? That's the true sign of healing. Can I look at that latte and not hate it, but, have fond memories? Oh, I love having me a coffee. It was so good. I still love the smell of it, but being iron deficient says I can't have that coffee, not even really a sip. My vertigo says I can't really do that. I can't have that level of caffeine. So that's what that Saturn going direct says. It's like, are you really healed, or are you just getting used to avoiding things? Like, did you really do what you had to do to clear the path forward, or are you just used to avoiding stuff? Because that makes a huge, huge difference. And it's going to tell the tale in 2024, because it tells us a lot about like how people are making moves. Sometimes folks are just, it's like they have the right idea, but it's all highly misguided. Like a lot of their energy and intention is highly misguided. Now, a lot of this kind of overlaps what we're talking about with Neptune, because Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012. It kind of went back and forth between 2011 or so, but it's been in Pisces since 2012 for, like stationary. And it's going to stay there until 2025. And October 2025 to January 2026, it'll go back to Pisces. But it's going to soon switch to Aries, right? In 2025. So Neptune is going to be leaving Pisces at around the same time that Saturn does, right? So Pisces, those illusions, that dreamy quality, that ability to really, Pisces energy has a sense of compassion, but we're seeing with Saturn, it's like, what does that really look like? What has that compassion morphed into? So Neptune in Pisces has busted a lot of our illusions where like religion is concerned, and just the way that we've been living our lives. I talked about this in the past stuff where I said, a lot of our illusions will fall away. Who you thought people were, what you thought life looked like. A lot of that stuff is falling away because we can't continue to proceed with things the way that they are, because there's a new way of living that we need. So just a small example. So like, I remember being very young, and my mom's mother smoked cigarettes, and so she would like just send us across the street. If I happened to be over there, she would send me and my cousins across the street to go get some stuff from the corner store. And we could, just be like, oh, we're getting cigarettes from my grandmother. And they would, if we had the money, they would, give us the stuff. And we walk out with everything in a brown paper bag and walk back across the street and give her whatever she asked for. And nobody would say anything, right? Like it was just like, okay, we're just going to pick up her stuff. It wasn't a big deal. Nobody would really say anything. That was just kind of how life was. And sometimes you could go to the store and get stuff for your grandma and not even pay. It was like she sent you to the store and then she come at the end of the week and pay for stuff. Like, that's how life was. That kind of living no longer fits in the scheme of how things are today. The mind works different. People are less trustworthy, and we don't operate on that kind of credit anymore. So things that we used to accept and ways that we used to live, like it just doesn't fit. It's not wrong. It's not bad. It's not negative. It's just that as we adapted and we changed, that kind of thing just doesn't, it doesn't have a place anymore. And so Neptune and Pisces is kind of hashing all of that stuff out, right? These illusions are falling away. The people that we once had on a pedestal, like they're coming down off the pedestal because number one, maybe they should have never been up there in the first place. Number two, there was this false sense of idolizing and that kind of thing happening. And there was this false truth that held them there. And so now we're examining those truths against what we need as our current reality. But we're also needing to examine our resistance to change. There is an overall kind of resistance to changing how things flow. So we're examining that we've been examining, Neptune's been in Pisces for 14 years. Last time Neptune was in Pisces was the end of slavery, Civil War. So, was that 1865? That was the last time Neptune was actually in Pisces. So, we're breaking down these illusions. There's changes to spirituality. Definitely go back and check out the Neptune's Generations post that I've done. But Neptune is going this year. Neptune goes retrograde in Pisces on July 2nd. And so with that, we're reviewing our aversion to religion as we approach the age of Aquarius. And we're also reviewing, there was this aversion to religion, and then all of a sudden there's this scramble back. There's like, oh my gosh, everything that we were doing with the candles and everything, we feel it's demonic now, and so now we have to go back. There's still this false sense of reality where a lot of things are concerned, where spirituality is simply our Christ consciousness. That's what, the Christians who are really practicing without any judgment, they'll look at it as Christ consciousness. And a lot of the other religions look at what love actually is, right? And so spirituality is that interconnectedness between it is the personification of God showing up in our relationships and how we connect with one another. Like, that's really what we're supposed to be focused on. Not some overly organized religion that says that if you do this, you go to hell. If you don't do this, you go to hell. Like, the fear tactics involved in that is what made people stray in the first place. But now they're kind of coming back because the brand of spirituality that they lean towards didn't lean towards spirituality where God was at the head, right? So taking God out of that spirituality is what has people feeling topsy-turvy. Because you went over there and lit a candle and thought lighting the candle was going to be it. No, you were supposed to have a relationship with God the whole time. You took God out of it. That's all it was. And so now people are like, oh, I have to go back to this organized religion in order to have God. That's not true. It's not true. But then you're going to still encounter the same thing because there's still a lot of persecution where religions are concerned. People do what they want to do. You do what's best for you in the position that you're in. But if you go back to the same place where there has been no change, you're going to encounter the same thing. So Neptune going direct in Pisces December 7th. Organized religion isn't bad if the agenda is for the people. The problem is the agenda hasn't been for the people or for God, for the people by showing them God or connecting them with God. That hasn't been the issue for a long time. It's been organized religion has been overtaken by people's personal agendas, and that's where we're having a lot of issue. So there are a lot of illusions and things that there's going to be a lot of tower moments, and it's kind of like breaking you out of your daydream, and just people that were held up high and exalted, like they're going to have to come down because they should have never been that high in the first place. I fully believe that there are going to be a lot of moments that people consider to be miracles, but they're not actually miracles. It's God working, and it's the way that it should be. But we've gotten so used to things not having God at the head that we've gotten so used to not having God at the head that all of a sudden when things happen the way that they're intended, it's like, oh my gosh, this is supernatural. No, that's what life looks like when you follow what God asks you to do. So Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, there's a lot of change that's going to happen, a lot of abrupt change. And a lot of this abrupt change is going to take place because we have to deal with the fallout of people and their decisions that they made. So you make these decisions, right? And there's going to be a reaction from that, right? Because something happens and then something happens. Like that's just even scientifically the way life is. And so there are consequences. And consequences are positive and negative. Things come to fruition. Things come full circle. And there's a lot of that that's going to be going on that karmically people are going to have to be accountable for. And so some of it is you're just going to have to let it like get out the way while the tower is falling down. Like, don't try to hold it up. Don't like let the tower fall. And then after those things occur, your personal code should kick in. Is this the type of place where I want to be? Does this align with who I'm designed to be? Should I even be over there? That's going to be a lot of where people are going to be at. And we're going to see the division and separation. It shouldn't cause any type of hate or judgment. I know it will, but it shouldn't really cause any type of hate or judgment. What it should just be is a space of realization. Because everybody isn't going on the same path. It's just the way it is. And it's like everybody's not designed to go on the same path. And so part of the clarity is just understanding. It's like, oh, I'm really supposed to be over here, and kind of gravitating towards other people that are in the space where you're going, which is a good thing. It's a really good thing. So Saturn in Pisces, Neptune in Pisces, lots to look forward to in 2024. Let me know what you think. Let me know how much of this is already resonating with you. Like, how much of it have you already seen happening for you? What does it already look like for you in your life? Let's chat. Let's chat about that. What does that already look like in your life? What are you looking forward to with Saturn and Pisces energy in 2024 and Neptune and Pisces energy in 2024 as both of them get ready to leave in 2025. Thanks for tuning in today. As always, make sure that you are signed up for my newsletter. I'll have links in the show notes, but make sure you're signed up for the newsletter. People who are signed up for the newsletter and Patreon get all different kinds of perks of following me. So I'd love for you to be able to join into those perks. And as always, thank you for joining me on Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes.